Good evening. My name is David Manley, coming to you from beautiful Yokosuka, Japan. And tonight I would like to present my research on my paper, A Conservative Internationalist Approach to the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands Dispute in the East China Sea. Now, the subject is very important to me because I am actually an active duty naval officer stationed in this area of operations. And this is a subject which is paramount or of paramount importance and has a lot of high visibility. So, just to give a little bit of background information, this island chain is 8 islands, or actually 3 islands and 5 tiny rocks that are equidistant from Taiwan and Japan, about 170 kilometers from each. They comprise approximately 7 square miles, okay, and they are highly contested between the Japanese, the Chinese, and the Taiwanese. In Japan, they are known as the Senkaku Islands. In China, they are known as Diaoyu Islands, and in Taiwan, they're known as the Diaoyu Islands. The reason why these islands are so contested is because of a historical muddling of claims, if you will. Japan's claim, or excuse me, China's claim goes back to the 15th century, as they say. They say that this was an imperial territory that they had control of. No one settled it, but this is still sovereign Chinese territory. The Japanese claim goes back to the late 19th century when they were annexed by the Japanese emperor. They were then administered by the United States after the United States defeated Japan in World War II. After Japan and the United States made amends, if you will, and signed the treaty, the islands, along with all of the other islands, including Okinawa down south, were reverted back to the Japanese. The United States didn't recognize the sovereignty of the Japanese in controlling those islands, but they did, however, acknowledge that Japan would control these islands administratively. So in the late 60s, there was a survey done by the U.S. Department of State, one of the energy agencies there, and it was discovered that beneath these islands, there was a vast quantity of both natural gas and petroleum. As you can well imagine, energy resources, especially in this part of the world, are in high demand. And so naturally, the interest levels for all parties involved rose greatly. So fast forwarding to now, the Chinese have been very aggressive, very assertive and coercive in sending their navy and their government vessels into the area to kind of assert their dominance and show that they have control of these islands. The Japanese push back. As you can well imagine, they also view these islands as sovereign territory, and they take the measures necessary to protect and defend themselves. This leads to a lot of close calls, a lot of close encounters between Japanese and Chinese forces, and it is a potential hot button in the region and in the world. Why this is important to us as Americans is because the United States is bound to Japan, the Treaty of Mutual Security and Cooperation. Article 5 to be specific, the United States agrees to defend any attack against Japan and the land that they have administrative control over, which includes the Senkaku Islands. Therefore, if there is an accident between the Chinese and the Japanese, there is a strong chance that the United States can be involved in a great power conflict, which is obviously something that no one really wants at this point. So, recommendations to counter this, if you will, is to approach it from a more conservative internationalist approach. We read in Dr. Now's book, Conservative Internationalism, that in order for diplomacy to be effective, it must be backed up by force. So right now, the United States has a sizable military presence in the Western Pacific and in Japan, to be specific. However, the competing demands between all this going on in this area of the world between Russia, China, and North Korea pulls those forces to the extreme. So one recommendation would be to increase the force structure, increase the number of forces, specifically in surface ships that we have in this part of the world. This will give us the means to more directly challenge the Chinese assertiveness in expanding their exclusive economic zones and in harassing allied forces in the region. Another recommendation would be to do more to strengthen the partnership between allied nations in this part of the world, especially Japan. As we read in Conservative Internationalism, one of the best ways for freedom to spread is for democracies to band together, if you will, and decentralized groups and spread freedom kind of in an inkblot strategy. And so building those partnerships, building those or that cooperability, I think will be of great strategic impact. The last thing that we need to make sure that we do as policymakers or future policymakers is making sure that this is an issue that has a fair amount of visibility to the American public. I think it would be safe to say that the majority of Americans don't know that there's a chance that conflict could break out over 8 uninhabited islands 7,000 miles away from our homeland. So it's incumbent on the powers that be to make sure that the American public is read into the situation, that they're well aware of it, and that they know exactly why it is that there is an increased emphasis on the Pacific. President Obama tried this back a couple of years ago with the Asia pivot to Asia, if you will, but because it wasn't carried out as strongly as it could, it kind of reduced and eroded our credibility in this part of the world. And so in order to rectify that, in order to give more meaning to our diplomacy and act more, I think that the best thing to do will be to meet force with force, stand up to the authoritarian powers that be in this part of the world, and carry the flag of freedom as we back up our diplomacy with force. Thank you and have a good day.